All right. So I think we're going to start. I don't know if anybody's logged in. You're watching this on YouTube, yeah?
No.
Oh, never mind. This video should be being broadcast. If you're looking to ask a question and there's anybody out there I don't know, I'm not sure exactly how this Google Hangout thing is working right now. But there's a Q&A thing where you can post questions. There's probably a delay. And you'll hear me say that in about 20 seconds. Just kidding. You can post questions on the little Q&A pane if you're through the Google Hangout module. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and get started. Basically, I'm going to show you some cool pictures, and the idea here is to give you information. I presume that you're all here to learn about the 2016 Hmong Diaspora Field School, parentheses, France. This will be a field school in France. But we're hanging out with Hmong people, and there will be French people involved as well. So if that's your particular interest, we'll have that as well. So real quick, just to introduce myself, I'm Jacob Hickman. I know most of you, not all of you. Maybe some of you know me because you're in my massive one-on-one class, and I just don't know your name. I apologize. I'm a psychological anthropologist. My training was I did my undergraduate here at BYU, but I did my graduate work at the University of Chicago in an interdisciplinary department called Comparative Human Development. And basically, I study the co-constitution of mind and culture. And I'm also a Southeast Asianist, so I focus on the Hmong diaspora when I study that stuff. I've directed field schools in 2012 and 2013 in Thailand, in the village where I did my dissertation fieldwork. And we did one just last summer in China and Vietnam in the border area, living in Hmong villages on both sides of the border. And this coming summer, I'm expanding the reach of my own research and bringing a bunch of students along for the ride. And we're going to France to look at some comparative aspects. One of the things I do is compare how different Hmong cultural practices sort of play out in different, what a technical way to say it would be, the macro social contexts in which people are living out their lives. Basically what that means is how they're affected by different, I'm gonna go ahead and blank that because that's kind of weird. Basically how they live their lives out, how they adapt to different social contexts. So if you think about, I've done 2 years of field work in Thailand, done probably about 2 years of field work at various points in the United States, Hmong in Alaska, Hmong in Minnesota, Hmong in Wisconsin, and some shorter field work in California. And I've done a lot of comparative work trying to understand how people adjust to these dramatically different places. Well, France is also a Western country where Hmong have resettled, kind of like the United States, and yet France has a dramatically different approach to thinking about ethnic minorities and acculturation and assimilation. You may know a little bit about like the headscarves, the public discourse about banning headscarves in schools and so on. So that's a different context where people are sort of forced to deal with, how am I going to live out my conception of the good life, what I understand to be my traditional ways in this new context. We're going to be studying, that's kind of one of the broader questions that we'll be attacking. But we can sort of take any of your interests and sort of fit it into that box. If you're interested in religion, how am I living out my religious conception of the good life? If you're interested in medical anthropology, how do I seek health practices? How do I decide when I'm going to go to a shaman versus when I'm going to go to a French medical clinic, and so on? If you're interested in music or dance, what does the expression of traditional folklore sort of look like in this community when, in part at least, French people are part of the audience for that, right? So there are a lot of questions that we could sort of fit into this broader research question of how do people adapt their lives to new social circumstances. And I'll tell you a little bit about Hmong people in just a second. But let me first just describe a little bit about what a field school is. A field school is pretty distinct. It's very different from any other type of study abroad program in that research is the game that we're playing. It is not about simply going to France and hanging out and having a good time. We're going to do that. But the reason we're doing that is to train you as researchers and to do research that results in publications. We want to actually write and publish some of the findings that the important things that we come to find over the summer through our fieldwork. And if students on this program work hard and put in the effort both before and after the field school, as well as critically during the field school, you'll have the opportunity to be an author on the publications that come out of the field school. And we have a good track record in our department, as well as me personally, with doing those types of things. In fact, my first publication came out of research, mentored research that I did as an undergraduate, actually in the same department with John Hawkins. Now, a slight aside, I might actually try and get John Hawkins to come out and spend a good amount of time with us in the field. He's sort of the field school guru. If you want to know what a field school is, by the way, I should send this out. One of his recent publications was in Current Anthropology, a top anthropology journal, talking about the field school model and how it can be productive to do sort of team-based ethnographic research while you're simultaneously training students to do ethnography and actually doing real research that's geared towards a particular research agenda, typically led by the faculty director. So if you're interested in learning about that, I could send that article around. What I strive to do is to develop a lab environment, for lack of a better term. What I mean by that is we're sort of a bunch of researchers working together as a team towards some end. But that doesn't mean we're all asking the exact same research questions. If you imagine a physics labs, you have postdocs and you have different faculty who are all working in the general same field, but they're all sort of specializing in different things and drawing from the broader base of expertise and the different experiments that different people are doing. And if any publication comes out of that, whoever sort of took that particular question by the horns is typically first author, and anybody else who's worked on it substantively also might merit authorship on that. That's the kind of model of scholarship that I'm looking to develop in my particular field school, where we're collaborators. Yes, you're getting training, you're learning how to do research. There are lectures and seminars we do in the field, but the vast majority of time is spent applying those lessons and actually going out and collecting real data. And the lectures are designed to give you training so that when that data comes back, it's something that we can actually do something with and analyze and try and publish from. And so typically what we're looking at is co-authored publications coming out of this. And if students take the bull by the horns and sort of really pursue their particular question, you can earn first authorship on a journal article. And we're not submitting these to piddly, the Journal of Undergraduate Research, like the one published by, our own ORCA office. We're shooting for real, peer-reviewed, rigorous anthropology journals. I have a couple of manuscripts that we're on the cusp of submitting right now. One of them we're going to be submitting to Political and Legal Anthropology Review, which is the core journal for political and legal anthropology. My colleague John Hawkins, he has now 3 volumes with University of Oklahoma Press that are edited volumes of student papers that he worked with students to develop and polish and get to a level where they could be published through, and has published these 3 volumes on, he directed a field school in Guatemala for decades. So, research is king here, or queen, depending on however you want to frame it. But that's what a field school is all about. It's learning to do research, and you don't have to want to publish to do this, but you do have to be committed to wanting to cultivate the particular skill set that we train students to gain, which is to do, to think critically about the research process and to apply those skills. You don't have to be headed to an anthropology PhD program for this to be useful for you. Professional programs and the consulting world, they deeply value the types of skills that we train in our programs that frankly, is not very common. The type of training and the level at which we do training is more common, frankly, of graduate study than of undergraduate study. And we actually, in my programs, and I've had a mix in the history and in the past of graduate and undergraduate students. So we're pushing you to do research that is more typical of master's level study than it is of undergraduate study. So that's what a field school is, and that's kind of the lab environment that I'm trying to establish when I undertake a field school. Yeah, so it's a collaborative as well as a mentored environment, right? Like you're sort of an apprentice in the sense that you're getting training, but you're out in the world actually doing interviews, actually doing participant observation, writing field notes, you know, going to shaman rituals, writing and thinking critically about what you think is going on there and trying to analyze it with some type of theoretical framework. That's the stuff that you do day in and day out on a field school, which is different from a typical study abroad program. It's rigorous, it's hard work, but it's also a lot of fun. I mean, this is why I'm an anthropologist, because this is what I love to do. Okay, I'm gonna share the screen here and turn this on. Oop. There we go. So hopefully Google Hangout people, world can, oh, they don't need to see me because they've got the presentation here. Okay. So really quick, you know, a 2-minute whirlwind of a couple centuries of Hmong history here. So Hmong, if you don't know who they are, they're an upland ethnic minority group that's originated from southwest China. Zoom in here. So that's more or less the region of China where Hmong have been in recent history, the last several centuries. In the 1800s, there began a mass exodus of people out of China. And now there's still about, the vast majority of Hmong people in the world still live in China, you know, 4 to 5 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. But in the mid-19th century, many people started migrating to Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. Now, where does France come into this picture? There was something called the Secret War in Laos, which was a theater of what we call the Vietnam War. It was more appropriately called the Second Indochina War, that engulfed really, you know, the vast majority of Southeast Asia, mainland Southeast Asia. And after the US pulled out of Laos, if you want to hear about this, I did a radio spot on Monday on BYU Radio. I could send you that link if you want to hear a little bit about the migration assimilation process. Or a critique of assimilation. But after 1975, the CIA pulled out of Laos, and this left basically hundreds of thousands of people who either had actually collaborated with the CIA, or who had family members who collaborated with the CIA, or who were merely perceived to have collaborated with the CIA, fleeing in mass numbers from Laos to Thailand, and ultimately being, you know, arranged in refugee camps on the Thai side. And then basically the United States took about 145,000 refugees over the following decades, and France took about maybe 10,000. The numbers are actually more difficult to track down in France, but there's probably now today about 15,000 people, Hmong people in France. That's one estimate among many. So that's where Hmong people come from. You'll learn a lot more about it. This is a story cloth that kind of depicts that history. As you move down, you're going both across time and space. In the top left there, you have Hmong fighting Chinese on horseback, then people fleeing to Laos and Thailand. The secret CIA air base is there in the middle, and then people are fleeing and crossing the river as they're being shot at, going to refugee camps in the bottom. And then the reason they're raising their hands is they're sort of swearing to the IMO or UNHCR that they, you know, basically attesting to their experiences so they can get certified as a refugee and receive third-party resettlement in a place like the United States or France. Okay? So we're going to France. The location, I'll tell you the village when I'm not, the name of the village when I'm not broadcasting this over the internet. If any of you are watching this through YouTube or Google Hangout, you can email me and I'll tell you exactly where we're going to be. But it's the central, it's in the Loire Valley. It's sort of central France. It's a smaller town that has about 60 Hmong families. Population is probably between 5,000 to 7,000 of the whole town in general. It's a beautiful place. It's fairly rural, but there's kind of a town, a consolidated old French town in the middle of it. And we can talk more about that if you want. Yes. And we actually, this is what we were driving through as we were going to check this town out for the first time. It really is absolutely gorgeous. Okay, so if you want more information, more details, go to my website. It's jacobrhickman.com. That's also where there are links to the application process and so on. And you can kind of click on this little, the field school thing, the third picture there from the left. And that's just going to take you to jacobrhickman.com/field school, where we have a copy of the flyer. And basically, there's kind of a text version of some of the main points I'm hitting on. So if you have questions about some of the stuff I've said that we don't get answered today, feel free to go there and check it out. So again, Hmong people kind of came from the hills of Southeast Asia. Here's what Hmong people look like if you want to know what they look like. This is actually a little town in China where I've done, actually Seth and I visited. Yeah, Hmong clothes. Somebody talked to me about possibly looking at textiles. There's a rich textile tradition. We could talk about that. As far as prerequisites for the program, so if you're an anthro major at BYU, you'll need to take 442, which is offered in the winter before you go. There's an Anthro 390R class, which is, the title is Hmong Diaspora Culture, History, and Language, which will provide you, it's a 3-credit class, counts towards the major. We will basically be spending about probably a little more than half that time doing language study, giving you a foundation in spoken Hmong, spoken and written Hmong. The goal of that class is to get you to a point where if you are dealing with a transcript from your interviews, a transcript, by the way, is you go and do an interview, you have somebody write down, if you're not a native speaker, or sorry, if you're not a fluent speaker, you have somebody write down every word of the transcript. The goal is to get you to a point where you could navigate a transcript, including the Hmong sections of that, when you're doing a discourse analysis of the data that you bring home. And also to give you some basic conversation. You're going to be living with Hmong host families. Now these families will speak both Hmong and French. Typically the kids will speak French better than they speak Hmong, and the parents, it's sort of a toss-up. They probably speak Hmong a little bit better than French, but they're going to be very eloquent in French. Many of them actually might have spoken French as kids in Laos because it was a French colony, right? So French is the lingua franca, but Hmong is also spoken regularly in these homes. So you're going to get, and the other part of that class, by the way, is sort of reading through some readings that puts all the students in the field school on the same page, having some foundation of literature that we all have read that deal with topics of cultural change, adaptation, theories of cultural change, and then some Hmong specific stuff about Hmong migration and so on. That way, when we get to the field, start research, can sort of hit the ground running, right? So that's sort of a mixed language and culture and history class, as the title suggests. Go ahead.
Is 390 hours with credits, or is that?
It's 3 credits.
Okay,
Yeah.
so are we looking at like 7 credits?
As far as prep classes go, 3,
Prep
6,
class.
7, yes. So the 1 credit prep class, okay, so the Kennedy Center for International Studies, which is BYU's entity that does the administration of these programs. And when I say the administration, I'm the director, but they do they have certain policies and procedures that they're in charge of making sure they're fulfilled. Like, for example, your student health insurance that's included in the program fee, they process all that. You don't ask me about that stuff because I don't know. They will tell you about that. They'll send you your health insurance card for your international health insurance. You know, there's a tracking system. BYU wants to know where all of its students in international programs, like they want to know where you are. So if we're traveling as a group, like they have a whole system for that, and Austin's going to get to know that system better than you will want to. But sort of the Kennedy Center, and you have to apply through the Kennedy Center website because in order to register for classes on the study abroad program, they sort of manage all that process, right? So I'm the director, but they do sort of the logistics and the bureaucratic stuff, for the, lack of a better term. Yeah.
So there's the possibility as well of living with actual French families.
Yeah. So we can maybe we can talk about that in the Q&A. But basically, it is going to be a Hmong-centric field school. Like I do the Hmong diaspora. That's what I do. I chase Hmong people around the world and try and figure out like how they live out their lives in different contexts. Now, if you have that being said, with any case, basically what we try and do is we try and find some common ground between the research, my broader research agenda, the stuff that I know really well, and your interest to find sort of a common research topic. And, you know, we can sort of, now I've networked into the Hmong community in this village. I know 0, you know, non-Hmong French families in this village. That being said, one of my contacts there is actually on the city council. So we can talk about some of those, you know, special needs and so on, but it really should, again, the research is, you know, the driving factor here. So it would depend on your research question and precisely the project that I'm mentoring you in pursuing, if that makes sense. So the 1 credit prep class, to get back to it, is basically, there are a bunch of logistics. BYU requires you to get a safety and security briefing, and you know, there's a bunch of things that we need to do as a group to make sure we're all on the same page. And when we hit the ground, we can hit the ground running in France to make sure everything's in order, that everybody's project is sort of set up, ready to go, and to make sure you know where to go. So it's basically sort of the logistical setup for the program. Now that 1 credit prep class will also be an anthropology credit, so it will count towards the minor if that's something you're looking for. And that's my last point is, if you take the prerequisites, that's not including 442. So if you're not a major, you don't have to take 442. That being said, it would be immensely beneficial for you to take 442, but it's not required if you're not a major. But if you take the 390R plus the 1 credit plus the 12 credits to take in the field, boom, you've got an anthro minor if you're coming from another discipline or field. Anybody here not an anthropology major? Wow. Our token non-anthropologist. What's your major? Just curious. Political science, yeah. So you do not, for those of you in, you know, YouTube land, you do not have to be an anthropology major for this. In fact, I don't know, it's probably been about maybe 2/3 of the students in the program have been, over the past years I've done it, have been anthropology majors. Maybe slightly less than that, but we accommodate, I mean, you get a broad perspective on social science, epistemology, and research methods, and so on. So I myself am a deeply interdisciplinary person. Like I have relatively little respect for disciplinary boundaries, especially when it comes to methods. So that's another discussion. You also do not need to be a BYU student, that's right. You will be, so for those of you who are not BYU students, currently, basically you will be enrolled as a BYU student for the duration of the program. And also the prep class thing sort of changes a little bit for you, which you can let me know if you have any questions on that. So we're gonna be in France. Everybody recognizes that, right? Here's some pictures of some of the classical architecture in the Loire Valley that Brenda put together. Brenda, by the way, is our tour guide and tour guide extraordinaire. Slash logistical person to make sure you're all happy. If you're unhappy, let her know. Don't tell me. Just kidding. Yes. Did I not say that yet? Yeah. Oh, so here's a clip from a Hmong shaman ceremony in Alaska, actually. But this was what, you know, roughly Hmong shamanism in France would look like. If you're wondering what the heck is going on there, come to France and find out. So she's a shaman. She's traveling through the spirit realm to track down what's going wrong with the person's spirit who she's trying to diagnose. And one interesting question that one could ask, for example, is how is Hmong shamanism changing? Are people thinking about things differently? When you have a traditional system where at a funeral, you're supposed to send somebody back to where their placenta was buried when they were born, what do you do when that placenta is now on a different continent because that person has migrated, 5,000 miles to go to another place? There are a lot of sort of interesting things to think about with regards to how people are living out, quote unquote, traditional culture in, a new context. I guess the only reason I really have this slide, this is from one of my publications I'm working on right now that sort of talks about all the different rituals that happen over the life course and how that plays into how people actually imagine their own identity as a person. You'll hear me go into detail in that should you come on the field school. I don't know if that's an incentive or not. I'm happy to share with you a host of publications of stuff that I've written on these general topics. The article there on the left is one that was actually based on fieldwork once again that I had done. I'd done the fieldwork for that as an undergraduate after having received 6 months of ethnographic training from Johns Hopkins, actually in Guatemala. But with the training that I did, I went to Alaska and did this project on Hmong health beliefs, and then while I was in graduate school, I got it published in an American Anthropological Association journal, the NAPA Bulletin, now the Annals of Anthropological Practice. So this is once again to say that you can do real research and you can publish it in real journals. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. The question is, how good can you do, what type of research can you do with regards to how much effort you actually put into it. And how seriously you take it. The two right articles are things that I published just over the past year. Things about ancestral personhood, basically how Hmong people imagine themselves as ancestors in embryo, if you will, and how that affects their interactions with other people. And then the top thing is about the moral views, the moral perspectives of people, and how those moral perspectives are changing. One of the things I looked at in the US and Thailand was how the parents and the children have different moral outlooks on the world, and what types of tensions does that create, both in between them as well as within the mind of a single person. I found, for example, a lot of what I call moral cognitive dissonance with the younger generation, where they're wrestling with different moral principles that they both see value in and yet have a hard time sometimes making a decision. Well, should I do this or should I do that? Because I kind of think that both of these ideas are true, but they're incommensurable with one another. And, we'll be reading a lot of, not just my stuff, we'll be reading a broad array of Hmong studies stuff, as well as anthropology of immigration and social change literature. Okay, I'm going to turn off the, would you hit the lights, please? Let's see, stop screen sharing. I can blank that. Okay, a couple of final notes, just sort of logistic stuff, then we can entertain your questions. What we do day in and day out, I've pretty much mentioned that. You're out hanging out in the community, interviewing people and doing participant observation. If you don't know what that means, it's professional hanging out. Like and I'm not joking, like it's funny to say, but you're hanging out with people with a purpose. You're hanging out, but you're sort of constantly having in the back of your mind, like, what does the world mean to these people that I'm hanging out with? And you're trying to hang out with them in a way that helps you figure that out. And then you go home and you write about it every day. You write up your field notes. Sometimes you do what looks more like a formal interview, where you actually have a tape recorder out and you're sort of talking to somebody about their perspective on life and trying to get systematically at some sense of understanding something about their life that you're trying to use to develop into a theory of some theory that says something about what it means to be human. Or, I mean, that's the broadest I say that because that's what anthropology is. It's the study of what it means to be human, right? So you're literally sort of out there hanging out with your host family, going to parties, going to shaman ceremonies. There's some really cool community festivals that'll be going on, particularly in the community where we're going to be living, that are quite interesting. And so you're sort of doing this stuff day in and day out, but you're doing it with a purpose. And you're going to spend no small amount of time writing about that every night as you document this stuff in your field notes. And, work back through your audio recordings and video recordings of shaman ceremonies, of, community, dancing and so on. It's things that you sort of observe in the community. That's basically what you do for field work. But there's also a lecture component. We'll basically typically meet probably twice a week for a couple of hours, and I'll have some more formal sort of lectures on how you do this stuff systematically. How do you conduct an interview? What's actually going on when you conduct an interview, and how do you do it in a way that helps you get good information versus information that you can't really use or analyze systematically, right? How do you do participant observation? If you want to do a community survey, what should that look like? You know, I do, we have a political scientist here. I do mixed methods research. The stuff I do can't be clearly categorized as qualitative or quantitative. And I'm going to give you some training on sort of the broad span of those different methods. And the idea here is that you find the methods that are appropriate for the question you're asking. There's a big problem in the social sciences in that, oh, I'm a qualitative researcher, I'm a quantitative researcher, which is really stupid if you think about it, because that basically says, I'm not willing to consider certain types of evidence because I don't deal in that type of evidence. Well, if you're a social scientist, you should care about any systematic evidence that could be presented on a problem, right? And that's kind of the approach that we take.
You can't take a break. It's not 24/7. You do hang out and you want things for movie nights.
But it's a rigorous program now.
So I'm the one that tones it down.
I'm cracking the whip and she's making sure you have a good time. That's basically what's going on. Yeah. Yeah, so you're living with host families. We do have, last summer we took a fairly compact projector with us, and we'd have movie night and do some fun stuff. It really is like, I don't know. We'll let Austin, maybe actually Brendan and I should leave the room while Austin talks, but we can let Austin and Seth sort of tell you a little bit about their experience if you want, or you could ask them questions directly. But it's hard work, but it is a really fun time. It's the most fun hard work you will have ever done. So the cost. Yeah, so if you're married, we can accommodate that. Basically, it's an issue of talking to me, but that is not a barrier necessarily. Last year I had 3 married couples. The first year we did it, we had 3 married couples. The second year we had 0, but, oh, sorry. The second year we had 1/2 of a married couple. Her husband had a job that he couldn't leave for the summer, and so they got married like 2 weeks before the program started too. No, she got the hardcore anthropologist medal for the summer for sure. Some of the cost details are on my website. It's kind of laggy here. The cost isn't absolutely set, but I'm kind of giving you a ballpark figure. Where is that? Oh, did I? Sorry. It's really really kind of laggy. Okay, so when we say the cost is approximately, I mean, I would say probably 63 to 73 is the range. I know that's a big range, but there are a lot of moving parts to this, including how many students we ultimately accept into the program, as well as some financial aid that I'm applying for on my students' behalf, some of which might bring the cost down and some of which might be distributed to individual students in the program, right? But that includes the tuition, right? So the tuition piece of this is included in that cost, plus a program fee. The program fee essentially pays for your living expenses, and then you pay tuition for the credits that you get. And the credits that you get, in most cases, and outside of compelling reasons otherwise, most students take 12 credits. For students who are not currently BYU students, we can talk about your professional needs and transferring credits back to your program and so on. But outside of those special conditions and whatnot, you're taking 12 credits, all of which count towards the anthropology major or a minor if you're not a major. Yeah, so I mean, you're looking at a program fee of neighborhood of $4,000 on top of the tuition, and that basically includes your room and board for 2 meals a day. So breakfast and dinner is typically the arrangement we have with host families. You're kind of out doing stuff during the middle of the day, so it's just logistically easier for you to be on your own for lunch and so on. So that includes basically breakfast and dinner with your host family, your room and board the entire duration of the program, group travel that we do as a group. Now we will have a week sometime during the summer where you have the option of staying with your host family and taking some time off, or going and traveling Europe by yourself or as in a group and whatnot. That travel is not covered by the program, but we will have some group travel that is covered by the program. The group travel that we do as a group is covered, included in that. Any travel you want to do before or after, that's obviously, perhaps obviously on you.
Like usually, like did all of this as a group, like travel together, but we asked our students last year if they would rather do like stuff on their own, so they go where they want to go, and that's what everyone voted for.
I also feel that Southeast Asia and China is a little bit different, because like in Vietnam, for example, there were things that we wanted students to see to get a broader political and historical context on Vietnam that really was kind of rare opportunities. I don't have anything in particular in France with regards to that. I think we'll get most of it from the ethnography. So that week you'll sort of be free to backpack with a subgroup of people or whatnot. And yeah, we'll talk about visa issues in just a second. But when considering the cost, a couple of quick notes. One, this is a full, you need to think about this in terms of not this is an extra summer program that I now have to pay for. It's a full credit bearing summer. Did you want to say anything before you leave, Seth?
It's great.
Yeah, there you go.
Who's been on free records?
So we've never done a field school without Seth, actually.
Yeah. I don't think
Seth can't get enough of his ethnographic research. But anyway, if you have questions, can I circulate your email?
yeah, definitely.
If they want to ask a student directly some questions.
If anyone wants to pay me to be a translator, I'll do it.
Yeah.
See ya.
So the way to think about this is like, you know, compare your living cost to actually living in Provo and getting a full semester's worth of credit, because all of the credit in the program, basically during the program, you'll take 6 credits of 495R and then a 390R and a 490R. Sometimes we switch those out for like a 439, but basically you'll take a people's class, you'll take a systems class, and then 6 credits of the required ethnographic field project, which is what's required to graduate, 6 credits of that, right? So all 12 of those credits, if you're a major, go directly towards curricular categories in our major, or if you're looking for a minor, that 12 plus a prep class equals the 16 credits you need for an anthropology minor, right? And then on top of that, there is financial aid potentially available. There's the ORCA grants. If you don't know about that, you can look at.
Sorry to interrupt you. What time is your class on?
We had the room for an hour and a half, I believe.
I was told this room was clear.
No, we scheduled it with campus scheduling. Sorry. We'll probably be done in about 25 minutes.
Okay, we'll just go to
Yeah.
Sorry.
What was I saying? Yes, so there's the ORCA grants. You can check that out at orca.byu.edu. There are Kennedy Center grants. I don't know much about them. I'm not a good person to ask about them, but the Kennedy Center can tell you about those. There's the Gilman Scholarship, Fellowship.
Yeah.
What's the web address for that? Is it, if you Google Gilman Scholarship, some students, they're more competitive when you're going to Europe because it's a national thing and a lot of people go to Europe for study abroads. But I would imagine that the research edge would sort of give you something that's distinct from other study abroad programs for this type of fellowship. And we had 2 students get it last time around, and it's a really good fellowship too. So look that up. That's an external thing. I have to approve your application, but you do the whole application process yourself and so on. And then on top of that, I should put some numbers together on this, but I've been really successful in getting financial aid directly from BYU, stuff that I apply for on behalf of my students. For that stuff, typically it's coming from the college, sometimes from the department. You don't have to apply to anything. You just, once you're accepted in the program, you just have to answer any questions I ask you about. Sometimes some of it's based on financial need, and I just need sort of, you know, how are you paying for this? You know, how much do you have to take out on student loans or whatnot? So some of that stuff, I just ask you questions and you give me the info, and then, you know, I apply on your behalf. I've never not gotten money from that source for at least, you know, the majority of students. Sometimes when students have an ORCA and a library grant and another thing, the college says, okay, we're not giving any additional money to that student, but we'll give it to these students over here who don't have any alternative sources of funding. I would say that I've gotten probably at least, between stuff that I've applied for and stuff that I've helped students apply for and putting together their applications, at least $1,000 for almost every single student in the program. And the average would be much higher than that. Now, none of that's guaranteed. It's all stuff you have to apply for. But if you're willing to work and apply for stuff, and I am on my end working and applying for stuff, you know, it drives that cost down pretty quick in the forms of financial aid. All university funding and financial aid can cover those costs as well. University scholarships, Pell grants, even, you know, federally backed or federal student loans, all of that stuff. These are, you know, absolutely the same on paper as regular on-campus expenses. It's a regular semester. You just so happen to be in a much cooler place, right? Yeah. Other questions on cost? Yeah. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
I have a scholarship to the university that's kind of on.
Yeah, so 12 is, we can make that work.
Might be.
Yeah.
I haven't done any.
I think they might change that for spring and summer, but if you need extra classes, we can make that work. Like there's for example, there's a supervised research class that we could have you do some extra hours for, something like that. And we could make that work in the scope of the program. I mean, basically, if you have special circumstances for your scholarship requires this or that, you know, let me know and we'll work through it. Those are questions for me, not for the Kennedy Center, typically. With regards to what credit you're taking, that's something that I decide, right? Yeah. Other questions on cost? Again, it includes living expenses, group travel, the international health insurance, that is included. So like, there's some weird thing where you have to have health insurance, like this fills that box as far as I understand, and that's included in the thing. And it's good international health insurance. And I both used this when we were students in Guatemala. We both got consecutively sick and hospitalized, and we did have to pay for it up front, but we got reimbursed as soon as we got back. It's really good health insurance. There's even expatriation of your remains, including should France erupt in revolution. You know, France has a revolution every once in a while, you know? Yeah, local research assistance and translation, that is also built into the costs. So if you're not, and that's critical, we do give you some basic language training to sort of, so that you can start to navigate things, because if you're studying a culture, you really should know something about the language. But also built into that is basically what we do, what we've done in the past is I try to get a 1-to-3 ratio of people who are fluent in one of the local languages to people who have studied it but don't consider themselves fluent. And you basically, we match you up according to interests, and you kind of go hang out as a team, go to shaman ceremonies in groups of 3 and go do interviews as groups of 3 sorts of thing, right? So that is built into the program cost as well. So if you really consider sort of the whole package as well as the additional funding that it's available, we have incredibly, you know, these programs are much, much cheaper than, you know, 3-week programs at other universities. And it's 11 weeks, by the way. We're looking at the last week in May to the first week of August, roughly May 24th to August 8th, as far as program dates. Yeah, so critically, before we talk about visa stuff, what is not included is your airfare to France, or the big things are not included. Airfare to France, we say vaccinations, I don't even know what vaccinations you need for France, but any of your personal travel and anything additional that you need for your research is a relatively rare thing, but actually oftentimes I can find some research money to help you with those things if they really are pushing your research forward. But like basically anything you want to, souvenirs you buy and personal travel you do, that's, I hope, obvious that that's all on you, right? And then lunches would be the other thing that's sort of on you. But you know, baguettes and Laughing Cow, right? I mean, there will be fantastic bakeries, and avail yourselves of them. Okay.
Another question about the address. So they recommend that you don't like go earlier. But if there's a possibility that you can find cheaper airfare, or
Yeah.
it's better for you to go early, like say like a week or two earlier.
Okay.
Is that
So let me roll that into the visa question. First of all, the host family arrangement we have for you will start the first day of the program and it will end the last day of the program, right? So you go early or stay later. I mean, if you have a serious situation, again, you know, we can talk about it, but typically, like, you're going to be covering the hostels or whatever to get you from when you land to, you know, when we have a host family ready to receive you, and vice versa. Like, we're paying these host families for your room and board through, you know, August 8th, and you know, you need to be sort of on the road or staying in hostels by then. Again, you know, you're also going to get to know your host families better than I will. So, but what the program will have paid for is what I'm saying will sort of be those parameters, right? That doesn't keep you from going earlier and coming back, with the exception that basically the visa situation is that you don't need a visa. You can just show up in the contiguous, and not even contiguous, but the European Union countries that constitute the Schengen area, the Schengen visa zone. You can enter any one of those countries and you have 90 days out of 180 to stay. So if you leave, the clock stops.
yeah, it's not because
It stops, it doesn't reset. So you're there 45 days, you go to the UK, it stops, and then you come back and it starts again, but you only have 45 more days, right? So the thing you have to calculate when you're buying tickets, because we're already at 11 weeks, so we haven't, you know, pushed those limits, but we're getting close. You need to make sure that you're not overstaying your visa, because if you do, there will be fees associated and so on, and that's on you.
That being said, it probably wouldn't be a deterrent to buy the longer term, like I think it's a 6 month or a year visa. I think it's only like $100.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of visa, but maybe the visa shouldn't restrict any travel if you rather than pay like $100 for
Yeah.
the visa.
So you can get the longer visa, but that's on you. We're not paying for that, right? So those are the visa issues. If you're not a U.S. resident, we need to talk. If you don't have a U.S. passport, we need to talk about your situation and just let me know, and we'll kind of take things from there. But all of this is assuming a U.S. passport, right? Does that make sense on the visa front? I would encourage you to go backpack the world. I think that's a fantastic mind-expanding exercise. But it's on your dime. And anything that's not program-based is on your dime, right? So,
I'm thinking that we'll stay in Paris for like 2 days at the beginning.
yeah.
But like just kind of.
Let's take a vote real quick. How many of you would prefer to fly to Paris, we meet as a group, and then sort of go down to the village together?
Or you can just.
The alternative would be, we give you directions how to get to the village, and we'll see you when you get there. Okay. First time I went to Guatemala, I'd never been to Guatemala by myself. I never traveled internationally by myself. Like, the closest thing was like being on a cruise with like a family in my neighborhood. And so when I first went to Guatemala, like, John Hawkins is like, okay, here's a Lonely Planet. Do any of you know what a Lonely Planet is? Backpacker's Guide. And here's where we are, out by the border of Mexico. You fly here, you get on this, and you know, don't let people screw you over on the way. And so, like, the first time, like my first night in Guatemala, I sort of found my way to this little kind of hostel hotel thing that I found in the Lonely Planet, and I sort of threw my bag on the bed and looked up at the ceiling. I'm like, holy crap, I'm in Guatemala and I'm by myself. I don't even know anybody for hundreds of miles. But it was a learning and growing experience at the same time. I think it's actually good for you. But we haven't decided yet. These are the things that we actually figure out in the prep class a little bit. But essentially, we may decide to meet as a group in Paris and do a thing or two, then go down to the community together, or we may just say, here's how you do it. And typically students will go in groups, so like buy their flights together, so that, because if one person found a cheap flight, typically it's the cheapest flight for everybody. And they'll all sort of go down together and sort of travel as a group. That's happened in Thailand.
Yeah, so
and
if you're like by yourself, don't worry. We will set you up with people who will not be alone. Because a lot of people, this is like their first time doing it.
Yeah.
Just know that we're there to help.
And I'm sometimes very surprised by who feels very confident by themselves and who needs help. Like, sometimes that's surprising. You look at personalities, like, I would have picked you for like a hardcore backpacker, but anyway. But no, we definitely try very hard to make sure you feel comfortable, that your parents feel comfortable, that you're not going to disappear and so on. Let's see.
And always know that like we're gonna have a house in the village. Just know that our door is always open. Like, if you need an escape from.
Brenda's happy to talk to you. You're probably trying to get an escape from me.
Or something, you can borrow in our house. So, like, can you play?
Actually, honestly, it's usually me trying to escape from you, to be honest, if I'm actually looking back at it. I'm trying to write my book, leave me alone. Yeah.
This is probably common.
So yeah, any questions? We're basically in kind of Q&A time.
So say, I apply and who do I get in? If something happens to someone's not able to go, when does the accountability start? Do you know what I mean? Like, when are things?
Okay, so yeah. The logistics of paying for the program and such. So, one more thing actually. I can't. Oh, there we go. Let me just screen share this. As far as applying, you do have to apply for the program. The only reason I put that in quotes is it's much more of a process of determining whether it's of mutual interest that you would come on the program, right? This is being a little bit laggy, but there's a button, big blue button right at the top of this page, apply now, which will take you to, in fact, let's just go there, the Kennedy Center website. You do have to apply through the Kennedy Center website. They want to know all your details. They want to have you in the system. And this includes those of you that are not currently BYU students. In that application process, if you're not a BYU student, it will guide you to create a BYU Net ID to apply. There is a small application fee. It's like $35. The Kennedy Center, that's their deal. It probably pays for the backpack that they give you. Because you get an actually relatively nice Dakine backpack to go on as you go on the program. That's all Kennedy Center stuff, right? But you do have to pay that $35 fee, and they manage the system. But that's my list of people that I look at that I know are serious, that really want to go. You fill out all those details and so on, and then we sort of use that to determine what our final list of participants is going to be. Now, once I click the accept button, basically within some period of time, they will start posting charges to your student account to cover that program fee, right? You'll pay tuition the same time that you'd pay tuition, but the idea is they space the payments for the program fee out across a semester ahead of time so that you're not sort of hit with a $4,000 charge like that you have to pay tomorrow, right?
Awesome.
So now, to answer your question, once you commit and you start paying those charges, the first $1,000 of that program fee is non-refundable. And the reason is, and we actually had a student drop out last year, we're starting to pay host families. We're starting to pay for tickets and stuff. And as was the case last year, like we had train tickets and plane tickets booked in this student's name, and that money was already spent. So like if you drop out after you've been paying for the program, the first portion of that, and I believe it's $1,000, is non-refundable, right? So if you commit to it, you start paying for it, and you drop out, that's okay. We can accommodate that, but it'll come at some cost to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's
so, and once again, that's because, we're making plans based on who's committed to the program at this point, including, arranging host families and so on, and people dropping out. I mean, you really shouldn't commit unless you really think you are serious. I get that things happen, your life changes, and so on, but just know that that's sort of the process. That's when it becomes real, is sort of when we click accept, they're actually going to start charging your student account, right? Within some period of time. The specifics about that process, again, those are Kennedy Center questions. Yeah.
What is there a LDS church in this town?
The closest one is Hmong. It's about 30
But,
minutes. But there's a bus that goes straight there.
we're not using place names yet. But they probably didn't hear that. We may cut that out. Okay, so one of the reasons I don't want to tell you the name of the village while we're being broadcast over the internet is because of basically ethical issues of maintaining the confidentiality of our research participants and so on. But other questions? Yeah.
It's probably sounds like a weird one. When we go into our host families, are we by ourselves the whole time, or are we grouping up into like teams?
No, so you'll unless you're married, you'll be by yourself. Yeah. So one student per host family. Now that being said, one of the people we know in this community, they're like 4 brothers of the same clan, actually the same family, and they all bought houses like right next to each other. And we're probably going to have 4 students with each of those families. So it'll be like you're next door to another student, next door to another student, next door to another student. But and you know the whole village is sort of walkable. We're still debating whether or not we're going to budget for bicycles or something like that. But it is walkable. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's maybe a little bit bigger than the footprint of sort of BYU and BYU housing, slightly bigger than that, if you're but it's not much bigger. So, yeah.
So I think the website said there were about 60 Hmong families on it. So does that mean that they make up a really big part of that?
Yeah, so I mean, you're looking at 60 out of maybe a population of like 5,000 to 7,000. I think it's closer to 7,000. Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how many families 7,000 is. We could do the math. It's probably, I don't know, what's 7,000 divided by 3.5? Probably 3, actually, right? 7 divided by 3, 70 divided by 3, anybody? 20, so what? That's under 300 families. Yeah, so I mean, that would be 50 out of 250, so maybe 1/5. If I'm doing my math properly. Better cut this out because I probably got the numbers wrong, but I can't do it without a calculator anymore.
Are they concentrated in one part of the town, or is it kind of just?
Yeah, they're a little bit spread out.
It seems so fun.
Most of them are homeowners. Okay, so Hmong have been in this community for a long time. Hmong have been in France. France actually opened up receiving refugee families from Laos before the United States even did, because the United States still was not until the 90s actually officially admitting that we even had a war in Laos, right? So a lot of people came to France because the door was open to go to France, and they didn't even know if the door was going to open to resettle in the United States, despite the fact that it was essentially our war there. It was more complicated than that, but yeah, so they've been there for decades. When they first moved to this community, I think they were living in more sort of like apartments, but the vast majority of people, from what I've gathered so far, are homeowners, kind of middle class families. And the arrangement that we shoot for is that you have a room by yourself in the, you have your own bedroom within the host family's house and so on, so that you have a private space to work and, decompress, etc. So, yeah.
As far as the multi-generational factor goes, most of these people are all the adults, they were born in China or
Born in Laos. The older generation born in Laos. The younger generation, depending how old they are, born in Laos, the refugee camp, or France. So the older ones may have been born in the refugee camp if they're 20-somethings. Anybody younger than that will have been born in France for the most part. Some of these families have gone to the US for a couple years, then came back to France. So now I should point out, so Austin's our facilitator. Do you want to say anything? I mean, maybe you could give us just a little bit of a sense of how you imagine the research process factoring into your professional trajectory. Can you take like a minute for that?
Yeah.
Why don't you come do it on the camera here?
Do we need to charge your computer?
Oh, I don't know. Does it say it's dying?
Yeah, it says it's dying.
Oh yeah, look at
Mine's tiny. It might not. I mean, this
that. It actually won't even work. Stop screen sharing. So we're gonna sign off of Google Land. If you have questions or anything you wanna, actually, let's do this.
So last in China, I was studying morality, and I was looking at morality in the context of selling, like economic transactions. So how these Hmong ladies would sell things to the tourists. So if I'm still deciding what I want to do in the future, but definitely I'm interested in ethics, morality, and possibly public policy. So I think.
So what about the research process, like getting training as an ethnographer? Like, how does that fit into your scope of like how you imagine your professional trajectory?
Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious if I decide to do a PhD in sociocultural anthropology, I think I'd be way ahead of other people that hadn't had that research experience. Even if I don't, though, I think just having the training to do, it's been like so nice to have that to fall back on, and like as I apply to other things, people have been really impressed doing ethnographic research for a summer. I don't really know specifically, but it seems to be something that is a rare opportunity. Not many people do. Other people generally get excited about it.
So, and even if you're not headed to graduate school as an anthropologist, one thing to think about, I mean, this skill set really is portable. I mean, critical thinking and analysis skills, that's a broadly applicable skill set. Like law schools, you can demonstrate, if you sort of give a writing sample from this research, something that you've actually published in a real journal, that shows that you really know how to think through a problem, that you know how to attack a problem, design a set of methods that helps you gather evidence towards a problem, and provide a convincing and intellectually defensible account of some answer to that problem. That is something that employers care about across the spectrum. That's not just an anthropology skill set. And it's not just even, an academic social science skill set, because, these skills will make you, an adept political scientist, because you'll see a part of the world in a methodological view that frankly, probably at least half of political scientists can't even imagine, because they don't entertain that type of evidence. And they don't understand how that type of evidence could be just as systematic and argumentative as the type of evidence they typically deal with, like election poll, exit poll results or something, right? Yeah. Any other questions?
This is kind of
yeah.
In your one-on-one class, we talked a little bit about having laws getting kept up, having a lot of children. Is it the same case in France?